Hello everyone, and welcome to my video on Amon and the Equalists, and mostly the problems I have with them in terms of writing, because the Legend of Korra's writing is not very good, and the writing of the villains isn't very good either. Now, Amon, in my opinion, is the best villain in Legend of Korra, which should tell you what I think of the other villains if I think this guy is the best, considering what I'm going to say about him. So anyway, what are the main problems with Amon and the Equalist cause as well? So, for those who don't know, the Equalists are the main antagonists of the first season of Legend of Korra, led by this Amon guy. The Equalists claim they're rising up to combat the oppression of benders, that is, for people who don't watch the show, people who can control the four elements of fire, earth, water, and wind, against non-benders. Basically, the Equalists say the benders are oppressing the non-benders, and Amon is leading them. And at the end of the show, it's basically revealed that, okay, Amon is shown having scars earlier when he removes his mask, and it's revealed at the end that the scars are fake, and that Amon himself is a waterbender, and he's been using blood bending to block the chi flow of benders to take away their powers. Now, first off, my first main problem with this is that this isn't really how blood bending is meant to work. It's meant to be something essentially powerful. Bloodbending is meant to be so difficult to do that bloodbenders can only do it in the full moon. And outside of it, they can't do it, but Amon's been doing it outside of it. Now, the show does try to justify it by saying that the bloodbending was something that Amon trained in hard, and there are other people who have unusual bending, like, for example, Combustion Man and Toph's metal bending. However, I would like to note that in the case of Toph's metal bending, it worked within the logic of the show already. Toph isn't directly bending the metal, she's bending the little bits of earth that are still in the metal. Now, with the Combustion Man, on the other hand, the main way he differentiates from firebenders in general is that, one, he is more powerful, and two, rather than using martial arts to bend, he blasts fire out of his forehead, which is like a deviation from the rules of firebending, but it also isn't as much of one as bloodbending outside of the full moon is. That being said, that is probably the least of my problems. So the people in Legend of Korra basically said as well that Amon's mask needs to come off, and I don't think it needs to. It's kind of like saying the Joker's thing needs to come off in Batman, but once again, these are fairly minor issues, and it's perfectly fine to have his mask come off, but it might actually be better make him a more intimidating villain if it never comes off, especially if those scars of his are actually real scars and not just fake scars. In fact, honestly, the show probably would have been better if it kept it so Amon really was injured by a firebender like he suggested. And that was his motivation. But moving on from his writing, well, actually keeping with it because this is part of it, the writing of the Equalists as a whole. To put in simple terms, the Equalists aren't really fleshed out as a faction, and that's one of the problems when they're like the main antagonists. So, let me ask you something. Based on what we see in Legend of Korra before the Equalists start doing their terrorism, do the Equalists have a point about benders discriminating against non-benders? And note, I'm not saying based on your personal opinion or anything like that. I'm saying based on what we see in the show, specifically before the Equalists start acting, as in stuff that wasn't triggered as a result of the Equalists. Not saying that the stuff that the other waterbending antagonist did was right, but if it happened after and as a response to the Equalists, then you could, then it's not really the cause of the Equalist uprising. It's not the reason why they're doing what they're doing. And the answer to that is no, the Equalists absolutely do not have a point based on what we see in the show or in Avatar. So, what do I mean by this? Well, to put it simply, there is no discrimination from benders against non-benders. The closest thing we get to it is the Triple Threat Triad, who are a bender gang threatening non-benders with their bending, but this is a criminal gang. It's like they're not representing the majority of benders. There are some criminals who are taking advantage of their powers. So, yeah, there's that. And aside from that, we don't really see any discrimination against non-benders. I mean, sure, they can't really compete in pro-bending, but that's not really discrimination. It's like saying that someone in a wheelchair can't compete in baseball or basketball. If you literally can't do something due to physical limitations, that isn't discrimination to not let you do it. But on the other hand, we do see some discrimination from benders against non-benders, like Mako and Bolin's, non-benders against benders. Like Mako and Bolin's boss, who is a non-bender, is screwing them, the benders, over. Their boss, who is a non-bender, is also the richest guy in Republic City. And need I remind you that in both series, the person in charge of the Earth Kingdom is a non-bender. Like, there are plenty of people in positions of power and authority who are non-benders. So, I don't really see any discrimination in the series aside from that one, gang there. And also, on a personal level, as in, interpersonal, the benders generally treat non-benders the same way they treat everyone else. They don't give special treatment or privileges to other benders. There's never a scene where, say, a famous bender goes to a non-bender and says, and assaults them for being a non-bender, aside from, the Triple Threat Triad or something. So, yeah, no, that isn't a thing. But also, another instance that the show uses to develop the Equalists is when Korra goes to the first Equalist rally. And the Equalist basically goes, oh, yeah, well, do you want to punch me in the face right now? And Korra goes, yeah, I kinda do. And they say, see, exactly the point I'm making. But here's the thing, this makes sense for the characters, but this isn't an example of discrimination against non-benders. This is Korra being Korra. If the Equalists were benders, Korra would have reacted in the same way. But what if, say, it was Tenzin who was there? I don't think a Tenzin would have reacted as the same way Korra would have. He would have been far more calm about it, and that would have, put a damper on the point the Equalist was trying to make there. How Mako and Bolin would probably be a lot calmer about it, too. So, the Equalists absolutely do not have a point. But the show doesn't really treat it like they have a point or like they don't have a point, it just basically treats them as an antagonist group with their hatred of benders being their motivation of it. So, whether or not they have a point or don't have one, or have a point but are going too far, really should play into the show a lot more than it does. And also, whether or not you want them to have a point or not, I think it's a matter of personal preference. I've seen other people criticize it and saying that Amon should have been depicted as right, as wrong. Well, because this is a matter of principal preference, I'm going to go over how I think it would have been better to depict them as, over both if Amon and the Equalists are meant to have a point, and if they're not meant to have a point. So first, if they have a point. Now, keep in mind for this as well, I am keeping them as villains. The Equalists and Amon, or at the very least Amon himself, are going to remain villains regardless of whether they have a point. And you can have stories where the villain has a point or is even right on some level while still being the villain. And, for example, you could have, say, a villain whose people are discriminated against who decides in a response to this that he's going to go and genocide some other group of people to replace them with his people and take their lands to get his people away from discrimination. Attacking some random group of people who have nothing to do with you because your people were discriminated against makes you, that isn't the appropriate response, even if you're right about the discrimination. But that's an example off the top of my head. Now, I'm going to bring up another one from a piece of media, but that can wait a moment. So, let's go with Amon having a point. First off, regardless of whether he does or doesn't have a point, the Equalists need to be more fleshed out as a faction for them to be the main villains. So, what we need to do is take the pro-bending arc, take the love triangle stuff, throw them in the garbage. Or, at the very least, heavily cut down on them. The pro-bending especially is basically kind of pointless. Aside from Amon attacking the pro-bending stadium, then it doesn't really impact the plot. They sort of imply that it's going to be how Korra develops airbending because of the motions that pro-bending requires are similar to airbending. That being said, this doesn't end up happening. This isn't how she develops airbending. So if you want to keep pro-bending, make it a very minor part of the plot that leads into the Equalist attack on the pro-bending stadium. Like, maybe have Mako and Bolin be the pro-benders, but have no one let Korra be a pro-bender, or maybe have Korra refuse to be one because she's the Avatar. It would be ridiculously unfair to put her in a contest involving bending. Even if it's just one element, but still. Have Korra drop out of it and maybe just come to visit the stadium to support Mako and Bolin when they're doing their pro-bending stuff. And make the plot be very small and have the attention focus on the Equalists, as well as, since we're going with the they have a point one, the discrimination non-benders are facing at the hands of benders. As in, put in actual discrimination, not a random gang attacking people, put in various barriers to non-benders achieving anything. Don't make the richest man in the city be a non-bender who's complaining about discrimination against non-benders. Not saying that couldn't happen, it's something like that could very well happen, but for the plot of a show, it kind of hurts the point that they're trying to make if you want Amon to be in the right. Or maybe if you do have him be rich, don't make him the richest guy. Make all the other rich guys be non-benders and have them be benders and have them treat him like crap because he's a non-bender. Or maybe have his business be genuinely struggling because benders won't do business with him. And have him take it out on the benders who work for him. Basically, because he associates them with the non-benders who are discriminating against him, and then the non-benders the benders that work for him in turn will take them out on non-benders that they have a problem with, or they just don't have power over them. But put in some actual discrimination on a societal level against the non-benders if you want Amon to be even remotely right. So now, how would this solution be solved in the end? So, another thing, if we're going this route, Amon 100% should have those scars, I think. Yeah, I do think in this route, having him taking the mask off and having the scars could be a good idea, especially for, the thing where Korra says he's faking it, and then Amon's like, no, I'm not faking it. Also, for this route, if you're going to have him be a bender, make him a bender who hates himself. But I think a better route would either have him be using chi blocking techniques like Tai Li, only of a more permanent matter, like perhaps some technique that permanently blocks chi, or perhaps using some new technology taking advantage of the steampunk setting, and this is a sort of technology that would permanently block bending, which would basically really help out with the themes of it being in the 1920s, basically, which, honestly, if you're going to have a basically 1920s Avatar, you should probably take advantage of the setting a bit more than they did, so I think that would be a good route to go. But in any case, have Amon really actually have been burnt by a firebender. And aside from having him being burnt by a firebender, make it clear that Amon genuinely believes in his cause, but also genuinely hates benders. He won't forgive even an airbender over what the firebenders did to him. He thinks they're all the same, hates them, etc. Make it clear that these two motives of genuinely wanting to help non-benders and hating benders are fueling the same thing. And now, how should this be resolved? Well, I think that we should take inspiration from Magi. So Magi is an anime that is based on a lot of things, including Middle Eastern folklore. And one of the plot lines of Magi involves and one of the plot lines of Magi involves a kingdom that really treats the commoners in it like crap. The royal family is very corrupt and incompetent, and Alibaba, the main character of Magi, or rather one of the main characters, I think Morgiana and Sinbad also count, but wait, not Sinbad, I forgot his name. Okay, but anyway, have the main character of Magi, Alibaba, despite being a prince of the kingdom, has effectively joined the revolution. Though in part that's because one of his friends is involved in it, but anyway, the revolution is right about the royalists. And after retaking the capital, the royalists are like, what are you gonna do now to deal with the corruption of kings? Alibaba's like, we're going to abolish the monarchy. We're going to be a republic from now on. So there, Alibaba's just presented a solution that could completely solve the problem of the corrupt royalty. But then the friend I mentioned, who turns out to be a bit more of a Robespierre character, comes up and says, that isn't good enough. We need to start killing people. He says it differently, but that's effectively what he says. And Alibaba ends up saying, hey, it looks to me like you just want to be king yourself. And when they're in private, and then he doesn't deny it. He's like, so what if I do? In essence, despite the revolution being right, or at least generally having a point, he himself was just taking advantage of it, though there's a bit more to his character than that, but he was basically taking advantage of it to attain power. He wasn't against kings, he was against that he wasn't a king. And I think in this case with Amon, one of the things that you could do, something like this should be done. So one of the things that you could do is, for example, have him treat benders who had their bending taken away like absolute crap, and encourage his followers to treat them like shit. And then, how I think things should be resolved is that Korra should resolve the discrimination against non-benders. She should remove it, get rid of it. And then Amon should say, that isn't good enough. The benders, all of them, even the ones who haven't participated in the discrimination, even those who fought against it, should all be punished. They all should lose their bending. And Amon could have some logic and reasoning behind it, or at least what he says it. Like, he could say, well, Korra, you're not going to live forever, so what happens, how do we know that after you die, the benders won't just go back to discriminating? And Korra could point out that I'm the Avatar. One of my reincarnations will keep making sure that this doesn't happen again. And Amon could then use some bullshit like saying, oh, but you're still a bender. And a bender policing a bender can never work. So, it could become quite clear that, in this moment, Amon has decided that he hates benders more than he cares about non-benders. And ultimately, what he wants isn't non-benders to not be discriminated against, it's he wants revenge. Just like how Alibaba's friend wasn't against monarchies, he was against that he personally wasn't king, Amon wouldn't be against discrimination. He'd be against his people being discriminated against. And that's how I think there should be done, where Amon has a point, but is still a villain. And now, moving on from this, what do we do if we decide that we want the Equalists to not have a point at all? Well, that's actually a kind of simpler route, and it's also probably the best one to keep Amon as a bloodbender. Make it so that the Equalists, rather than a large movement, are a fringe group of lunatics, and make this absolutely clear that most people in the city do not support what they're doing or their plans to take away bending, and most of them realize that they're full of shit when they say that there's discrimination against non-benders. And actually, you would keep most of the elements of the show the same, just make the Equalists a bit more clear. But then if there's no discrimination, what would the Equalists be motivated by? Well, the answer is simple: jealousy. Think about it this way. There are lots of people in the world of Avatar who can use supernatural powers to manipulate the very elements that make up the world. A group of people who like, are jealous of them, even if they aren't necessarily bad people. Some of them are, some of them aren't. They're the same as anyone else. But even if they aren't discriminating against them, a lot of people would be very jealous of them. So when that jealousy starts manifesting, Amon comes in to take advantage of it. In this case, Amon is an even more clear villain than the other one because, like I said, he doesn't have a point in this version. He essentially is just using the Equalists to get power by preying on their jealousy. And ultimately, it might even be that you could do a twist where at the end, when it's revealed that Amon is a bender, if you still want to go down this route, the Equalists don't care. Like, they don't feel betrayed that a bender was leading them. They decide that, oh yeah, he's like the one good bender, or they just don't care because they're all this time are acting out of jealousy, and they ultimately decide that, so what, he's still getting us what we want, he's still getting rid of the other benders. So, yeah, and, well, in this case, I mean, it basically would probably go somewhat more like the show does, because once again, except the Equalists would be put down a bit better or more violently, because like in the show they all sort of disperse when they find out that Amon was the bender and lying to them all along. But in the case where they don't care, well, I mean, that would also make them more clear antagonists, because it becomes clear that they weren't doing this out of principle, but 100% out of jealousy if that wasn't made clear before, which it would kind of need to be. So yeah, that's my problem with Amon in The Legend of Korra, and a bunch of its writing as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.